Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the ACI-LAC webinar, an introduction to A-CDM. We're having today together with Canso, and we are going to have speakers from ACI World and 270. Let's give a couple of more seconds for the participants to join before starting. Okay, well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the webinar, an introduction to A-CDM that we are organizing here today with our colleagues from Canso. Today we are going to have the following speakers: Javier Vanegas, which is the director of Canso in Latin America and Caribbean. We are going to have Thomas Romick, the Vice President of Safety, Security, and Operation at ACI World, and Mr. Matt Shepard from CF Managing Director from our World Business Partner 270. As you all know, we are going to have a simultaneous interpretation. For that, you only need to click to the globe icon that you will find in the Zoom menu and you select the channel of your preference. In case you listen to the voice of the speaker and the interpreter at the same time, we recommend you to click the last option of the menu that says mute original audio. The chat function is not available, either the Q&A function of Zoom. We suggest you to send your questions to the email address that you find on the screen, info@aci-lac.aero. We will have a Q&A session at the end of the presentations. So without further ado, we would like to give the floor to Mr. Javier Vanegas from Canso, which is going to give some welcome remarks. And we really want to appreciate your support, Javier, organizing this, and also take the advantage of having you all here to invite you to participate in our ACI-LAC annual conference that is taking place in November in Miami, where Javier is going to moderate a panel on A-CDM, where we are going to try to discuss what are the challenges and opportunities for the implementation of this concept in the Latin American and Caribbean airports. Without further ado, I would like to give you the floor to Javier for the opening remarks.
Muy buenas tardes, ¿cómo están? Quería primero agradecerle a todo el equipo de ACI, también al señor Rafael Echeverría, por todo el apoyo y esta unión que estamos teniendo para llevar a cabo la implementación efectiva, eficiente, eficaz de A-CDM en la región de Latinoamérica. Con ustedes van a estar el Thomas y Matt, grandes amigos, increíbles profesionales que saben mucho del tema y por favor tomen ventaja de todo lo que ellos tienen que decir. A-CDM, todos entendemos que es una idea, una iniciativa sumamente importante para la aviación, pero lo más importante para iniciar y empezar con las bases es tener esa colaboración y cooperación que debe tener antes de iniciar no solamente A-CDM, sino muchos otros proyectos que debemos implementar en la aeronáutica. De nuevo, estamos muy agradecidos con todos ustedes por participar, muy agradecidos con ACI, con Francisco, con Carla, con todo el equipo de ACI que ha permitido este webinario. También agradecer a quien muy ampliamente están muy abiertos a compartir todas las mejores prácticas que tienen que ver con el tema de A-CDM. Y les insto, les urjo, les ruego que por favor siempre tengamos esto en mente porque es una iniciativa sumamente importante para nuestra región, para no solamente nuestra región, otras regiones, pero en este tema es la región de Latinoamérica y el Caribe, que debemos seguir adelante. Francisco, vamos a estar moderando un panel durante el evento de ACI en Miami. También los invitamos a que participen en ese panel, pero también la idea es no solamente dejarlo en este webinario o en ese panel. La idea es iniciar el proyecto de A-CDM. Si podemos iniciar con 1 o con 2 aeropuertos, está excelente. Y unirnos para que en realidad llevemos a cabo esta iniciativa. Gracias, muchas gracias ACI, todo el equipo de ACI, por Matt, por apoyarnos en esto y espero que les sea de mucho agrado este webinario. Muchas gracias y nos vemos en noviembre. Hasta luego.
Buenos días a todos y todas. It's a pleasure to be here on behalf of ACI World, and I'd like to start by thanking my friends at ACI-LAC for the invitation to join this webinar and to speak to you a little bit about the importance of collaborative decision-making and the implementation of CDM on a global level, and also, of course, in the context of the LAC region. I'm going to run through a number of sort of general principles on CDM here. I'm going to mention some of the future trends that we're seeing also in terms of traffic, which is an important piece considering the evolution and the need for additional capacity to be available within the aviation system. And then I'm going to hand over to Matt Shepard from 270, who's going to go into much more detail in terms of practical use cases and implementation of A-CDM. So it's going to be a two-piece presentation. My name is Thomas Romig. I'm in charge of all of the policy making and activities that we do in the operations domain at ACI World, based up in Montreal. And spend a lot of time working with our friends over at ICAO on a whole range of different topics, and CDM is actually one of the topics we're picking up with them now. Carla, if we can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So to start with, the first 3 slides I have are just to give you a little view of what we see in terms of traffic. CDM is tied to our needs across the aviation industry to make sure that we are using the capacity we have available to best serve our customers, the airlines, and to be able to provide a sufficient volume of capacity for the demand that we have. And as we can see in this slide here, we expect that we will be back towards the 2019 passenger volumes in 2024. Coming up shortly. It actually looks like in some regions we're seeing a higher growth than what we had expected. So we're looking now to achieve a good recovery of the traffic following the pandemic. Now, this recovery of the traffic, if we go to the next slide, is actually, of course, one of the challenges that we have as an industry as a whole, where we had 9.2 billion passengers that were traveling through airports in 2019, and we see 2024 we should be coming back to that 9.4 billion passengers, so slightly above where we were in 2019. But we're going to see more than a doubling of the traffic, which will take us towards 2041. This growth is going to mean that we have, from an aviation perspective, the need to manage the demand and to manage the capacity that we have available within the aviation system to meet that future demand. So we know that to be able to manage capacity, there are different ways, or to make available capacity, there are different ways of doing this. If we go to the next slide, there are, of course, construction, and we had conducted in 2021 a CapEx needs study. So it's a study which allows us to identify the needs in terms of capital investment for airports across the world. We know that there are approximately $2.4 trillion worth of investment which will be needed by airports to meet the expected demand of 2040. This is a huge amount of investment which is going to be needed, and that growth which we see, I mean, in essence, in terms of some of that investment is going to be almost the same volume as some of the GDP of some of the G7 countries. France, for example, is around that $2.4 trillion. What we do see is that there is going to need to be about a $1.7 trillion investment for brownfield developments, which means the retrofit or the improvement of existing aerodromes. And we see another 730 or so $billion worth of investments for greenfield airports. So it's new airports which are being developed. Now, if you look in the bottom left-hand side of the slides, we see for the Latin American Caribbean region, there's 94 billion, which has been identified as the needed investment for reaching the future capacity necessary for accommodating demand that we have of these 19 billion passengers in 2040. So the investment is huge. Now, to defer some of the investments, go to the next slide, we also have the key point, which is being efficient. And efficient aerodrome operations, efficient aerodrome infrastructure is one of the best ways for us as a community and as the operators of aerodromes to ensure that we provide the capacity available to our users. Now, creating efficiency can be challenging. It requires collaboration, and Javier just mentioned collaboration as one of the key pieces. And I always like hearing from the air navigation service providers that they are looking for collaboration, because this is, for me, one of the essential pieces of creating efficiency within an airport, is looking at the system-wide perspective to bring together all the different stakeholders, the airlines, the airport operator, the ground handling service provider, the air navigation service provider, and all the other stakeholders, in some cases the regulator or the CAA, to create those efficiencies. Now, if we go to the next slide, the whole point of A-CDM is actually that level of efficiency which is created. So part of the answer of creating that efficiency is through CDM, collaborative decision making. So collaborative decision making is a methodology. It's a process that we have developed across the aviation system. We have, let's say, a philosophy that we could almost call it, which is that level of collaboration. But then we also have A-CDM, the airport collaborative decision making, which is the data exchange amongst the different stakeholders at the airport. And as I mentioned, Matt will be speaking to that in much more detail as we go into the webinar a little bit more. But coming back to the philosophy piece, the collaborative decision-making principle is actually having the level of coordination, collaboration across the aviation stakeholders at an airport to be able to create the operational efficiencies which we would like, to optimize the performance, to actually have the best use of the system capabilities, the system capacity. On an airport, we have a runway. A runway has a certain defined capacity, and we have an airspace which is serving that runway, and the airspace also has a defined capacity. Now, in some cases, we don't have a match between the two. And in some cases, we have a runway which we would like to use more, and we have limitations in the airspace. Or we have a terminal which has limitations in terms of capacity, but we have available capacity on the runway or on the aprons. There's all sorts of different combinations we can have, which allow us to be able to use the capacity in the most effective way. But in order to achieve those combinations, we must have that level of collaboration and coordination across the different stakeholders within the aviation system. The interesting thing is with CDM, it also allows us collaborative decision making, also allows us to have a more predictable and a smoother operation. And so from a passenger experience perspective and for serving the customers at the airports, in particular the airlines, that is one of the key elements that we're going to be looking for. And when it comes to improvements in terms of the asset usage, so the stands, turnaround times, it can be the baggage hall, it can be the check-in desks, all of the different assets can be planned and used in a more effective way if we have that data exchange and we have that collaborative decision-making approach which is implemented. So if we go to the next slide, I have just a very quick overview of what we consider to be A-CDM. A-CDM in essence, and I like this image which I put in the bottom left-hand side, is an integration of data from all of the different partners within the airport system. The airport operator being central to that, but we have ATC providing information, we're receiving information and providing information. We have the aircraft operators providing and receiving information, and sometimes that comes through the ground handling service providers. We then tie all of that to the flow management for air traffic control and bring in other elements of data and information as need be. But what A-CDM is going to provide, in essence, is that more efficient and transparent cooperation and predictability in terms of the airport system. So having that as a fundamental principle of managing the operation at the airports is really one of the essential pieces to creating those efficiencies. Now we have the possibility with A-CDM also to take it one step further and go towards what we call total airport management, or TAM. TAM is actually integrating A-CDM and integrating the collaborative approach to the management of the airside operation, the air traffic flow, to an airport-wide approach. And this is one of the evolutions that we're seeing more and more on a global scale in terms of considering the overall airport, looking at the terminal operations, even the the landside access to the airport, looking at the air traffic flow and how that fits into the use of the airfield operations or the airfield infrastructure, and creating again those synergies between the landside and the airside to have best use of capacity. We go to the next slide. ACI World collaborated with a number of different airports and also some of our world business partners to develop a handbook, which is available actually on the ACI website, aci.aero, and there's the web store, which is on the aci.aero website. This document is available in English and Spanish. And it really looks at the implementation of A-CDM, but then also the evolution of A-CDM towards total airport management, TAM, as I was just mentioning. This document is really actually a guide to help support the understanding of what CDM is. So it's the basic principles, the basic concepts around CDM, collaborative decision making, and then it builds a step-by-step approach for the implementation of A-CDM, and goes into also how you go from collaborative decision making and the data exchange which you gain through A-CDM implementation to the notion of total airport system collaboration, or TAM, as I was just explaining. It also contains a number of case studies and lessons learned from some of the ACI World business partners who participated in providing their experiences in implementation, as well as some of the airport operators who went through the implementation of CDM. If we go to the next slide, please. So just to speak a couple more slides here about the evolution of A-CDM. A-CDM really, for the moment, in its principle, focuses on the data exchange across the air traffic flow and the aircraft operation. So it's really kind of looking at the airside operation. And what we're looking to go towards is actually a more integrated approach where we have an airport operations control center or an airport operations center, AOCC, or APOC, Airport Operations Center, where the focus will actually be on bringing together the resources who are going to be collaborating to look at the airside and the landside processes and really optimizing the flow of information, the decision-making processes across the airport. So A-CDM is a fundamental pillar to that, as it provides the data that you need to know when your aircraft are arriving, what the different phase that they're in for the turnaround process, when they're going to be departing, and how that whole aircraft piece fits together. The interesting piece is bringing in the passenger side and integrating the information related to how many passengers are going through security, how many passengers are at the gate and ready to board, whether the boarding has started or ended. For example, even looking into some of the baggage information and understanding how many bags are going to be loaded on each aircraft and so on and so forth, as this will give you more information, allowing an airport to have a view of the flow of passengers, bags, and aircraft within the airport system. If we go to the next slide, we have here a very quick sort of map that we've put together to look at the notion of system-wide performance and the different flows that we have, so the aircraft and the passenger and the baggage, that are managed through the Airport Operations Center, the APOC. What we try and do is plan in advance and get a very clear idea of what is going to be, what flows we have, so how many passengers we have, how many bags those passengers are theoretically going to be arriving with or moving through the infrastructure with, what the aircraft flow is going to be looking like. The A-CDM piece is going to be the tactical piece, which will give us the day-to-day operation, which will give us the on-the-moment information, visibility, and situational awareness as to how we can best manage the operation on that particular day and in that particular moment. There's also, if we bring together all these different airport flows, there is the notion of total airport management, which will start coming out, where we have an airport operations plan integrating the weather information, integrating the different flows that we have through the airports and any restrictions we may have in terms of capacity, any restrictions we may have in terms of operating procedures at the airport, which can impact the normal operation across the airport system. So what we're going to be looking for, and this is detailed in much more elements in the manual I was just talking about, but what we're going to be looking for is really driving performance across the airport system to optimize the use of capacity to then meet future demand, which we expect as we build forward. The advantage of best using the infrastructure we have, best using the capacity we have at airports, is going to be a reduction of the costs that we have theoretically that we will need for investments in the future, the multiple trillions of dollars, which I just mentioned in the introduction here. And if we go to the very last slide here, before handing over to Matt, I'd just like to mention that we are currently working with ICAO to develop some guidance, which will be state-level guidance. And this is a working group which is led by ACI World. It has airport operators, it has air navigation service providers, it has ground handlers, It has states, so the CAAs from the states. It has even the representatives of IATA who are part of this from an airline perspective, as they are important also in the development of CDM. But we're looking to create a reference material which will allow us on a state level to operate to provide guidance across to different users. I see there's some challenges related to audio. I'm just checking to see if I can still be heard, maybe from the hosts.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, so it's not on my end then. That's good. Thank you, Francisco. So that was my quick introduction in terms of what we're doing with ICAO and where we are overall in terms of the implementation of TAM, some of the guidance, of CDM, and some of the guidance that we have developed with ACI World. And with that, you have my contact information here at the end of the presentation. I'd be happy to follow up with anybody who has any questions in the future, and we'll surely be able to answer some questions towards the end of the hour that we have here. But would like to hand over to Matt, so long as he is still available. I know you may be having some sound issues. Matt, can you hear us? And would you like to jump in for your presentation? Thank you. Matt, can you hear us?
Okay, I'm hoping that everyone can hear me. Strangely, I've lost my camera, and my audio. So can you hear me, Thomas? Would you mind just raising your thumb if you can? 5
out of 5, I can hear you, yes.
Yeah, great. Okay, thank you. I'll just keep on moving forward with the presentation if I can. Carla, would you mind just advancing, please? Thank you very much. So, and I do apologize. I'm not quite sure why I can't hear anything, but I'll just proceed anyway, and I can see the text coming through. So if we could just move forward into the next slide. Thank you. So I think what I would like to say first is thank you very much, Javier and Thomas, for bringing this together. And it's really exciting to be part of the ACI development moving towards airport CDM. And I really did like that element that Thomas talked about airport CDM being a journey that I think we're on. And we move from airport CDM as being the very first step in a journey towards moving to total airport management. And it's very much the first step that we need to take. Moving forward to an AOCC requires an airport CDM platform in the baseline for it, and then stepping forward into an airport operations plan that starts to grow out the capability of an airport to become fully connected into the full aviation network and no longer operating to some extent as an island on that in a great sea, but as part of that sea moving forward. Next slide, please. So I'd like to speak, and I'll move fairly quickly through these points. And I'd like to discuss why we need airport CDM. What are the systems that we see in our operations that require us or give us an indication that we need to have airport CDM? And then I'll talk a little bit about what is airport CDM and discuss some of the concept objectives at a fairly high level. And then go to one of the important things, I think, which is the driver for it. Why we're doing airport CDM is because we get benefits from it. Then I'd like to move into a short conversation on who can lead airport CDM. It's not necessarily the airport that needs to drive this. And I've been brought on as part of CANSO to talk about this. So I have an ANSP aspect and a viewpoint to it as well, which adds together with the ACI vision of where airport CDM leads. And then I can give a case study with a couple of examples picked up from a European airport. And then I'd like to finish off with a conclusion summary and then a short discussion about how we would set up an airport CDM project in the next phase. So next slide, please, Carla. When we look at what are the symptoms of why we might need to have airport CDM at an airport, one of the first things we notice is that there isn't a clear view across the whole airport of a lot of information, and no one really has a full view of the plan. Who knows when an aircraft is going to be ready for pushback at an airport? The airport and the air traffic controllers, do they know when an aircraft will be ready to push back? The answer is no, they don't. The ground handlers and the airlines are the ones that actually know when an aircraft is going to be ready to push back. And next, advance, please. So part of our consideration is if ATC don't have the information on when an aircraft is going to push back, how are they able to make a plan?
Matt, sorry, Matt. Oof.
Do airlines know when an aircraft is going to be cleared to start up by the tower? The answer is no. But what we do know is that ATC are the only ones that actually know when they will issue a startup clearance. So ATCs are the ones that can actually be aware of that information and can share that information through to the rest of the airport operation. Next slide.
Matt, I apologize, but I believe we
can't hear you.
We can't hear you very well anymore. I think there's a challenge related to your sound. Perhaps you can disconnect and come back into the conversation in just a moment. That might be an appropriate way of reconnecting.
Is anyone able to hear me now?
Yeah, we can do that. I'm just texting him.
I'll just disconnect.
It may be that there was a technical issue there.
Things that happen.
Yep.
Okay.
So I think what Matt is trying to explain here, and I'll jump in for him while he comes back. But it builds on what I was explaining earlier, is the importance of making sure that the information from around the turnaround process comes up to all of the different stakeholders who are at the airport. And one of the challenges we have at an airport is making sure is understanding the level of preparedness, the level of readiness that the airlines have and the ground handlers who are working with the airlines have to accommodate their operation. And they're the ones who really have the best understanding and visibility of where they are on in their turnaround, in their process there. And ATC, unfortunately, doesn't have that directly.
Thank you, Thomas. Matt just joined. I think he's trying to connect. Okay, apologize all for these technical problems that we are facing. We're trying to connect with Matt again. Maybe in the meantime, Thomas, we have received one question here. Maybe you can answer it while Matt joins. And it also could be a summary of what you have mentioned, which is what are some of the benefits and challenges of implementing CDM at an airport?
It's a very good question. And so I'd start out by saying the benefits are going to be more than the challenges, although there are lots of challenges related to implementing CDM. You know, the benefits are going to be really the use or the predictability that you have for the operation, and understanding the aircraft flow, understanding the level of readiness which each of the aircraft which you have on the ground or that you are accommodating into the operation. And so really, you know, when you have an aircraft on approach, you would, or which departs from a previous airport, you would already be able to receive information in terms of when that aircraft will be arriving at the airport, receive information then on the ground in terms of the level of readiness and the turnaround operation. So when the doors are closed, when it's ready for pushback, which then, and startup, which then will allow the flow for departure to be much smoother. So it's really providing the airport operator and all the different stakeholders with that level of visibility and transparency in terms of the operation. I think the challenge, one of the big challenges that we have for the implementation of CDM is actually getting all the different stakeholders to work together and align to come towards the common goal of data exchange, of information exchange that we need to really implement the CDM across the airport system. So creating the level of collaboration necessary is one of the challenges, but there are mechanisms to do that, and we'll be able to talk about those a little bit more in a minute. In between times, I see Matt has made it back, looking fresh now.
I'm back. I've had a shower and everything seems to be working. I'm not sure what happened there. Do apologize. If it's okay, I'll keep on rolling.
Thank you, Thomas.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks, Thomas. Could we just jump to the next slide, please? So where I was discussing who knows the plan about when an aircraft will operate. When we look at who would know when an aircraft will be able to receive a start clearance, airlines don't know when an aircraft will get a start clearance, but ATCs do know that information. So next advance, please. We'll just keep moving through. How can an airline plan in advance if they don't know when they're going to receive a start clearance? And how can ground handlers plan when they don't know when an aircraft will be starting and leaving the gate? Next slide, please. So who has a complete picture of what is going to operate on an airport? These are some of the things that give us an indication that we need to do something. These are the symptoms we see. When an information is going to be passed on to other partners, do we know that? And do we have a common language that we all speak to? Next slide, please. We don't have a common language. So when we're on an airport and we're talking about what is the estimated time of arrival, for an air traffic controller working in the control center, radar vectoring traffic to the airport, they may consider the ETA to be the time that the aircraft arrives in the terminal entry. For someone who's working in the control tower at an airport, for them, an ETA is the landing time on the runway. But for a ground handler or an airport or an airline, ETA generally means the time that the aircraft is going to arrive on the stand. Advance, please. So the other one, of course, is who knows what an estimated time of departure is. In the tower, that's considered to be often the takeoff time. For a ground handler or the airport or an airline, this is more likely to be a pushback time from the stand and the time that the aircraft leaves its parking location. So we have different elements here, different languages that we use to speak. Next slide. So how would it be if we had a common language and we had common goals? Because if we speak a common language and we share common goals, then we're able to work together to reach those goals. Next slide. If we could share and predict earlier and more accurately, what could we do? Airports would be able to resolve their gate conflicts and improve the passenger experience. Ground handlers could deploy their resources more efficiently. And air traffic controller, if they know what time an aircraft will leave the gate, can plan their departure sequence better to minimize delays on the taxiways and on the runways. Next slide, please. I do apologize, I'm going to have to go a little quicker now. So airport CDM is a cure for these operational inefficiencies that we can see. It improves situational awareness. It improves operational predictability. It improves the decision-making made by stakeholders because we can give them accurate information to make those decisions. And by making accurate decisions, we can improve our infrastructure use and we can improve the resources use on an airport, whether that's human resources or whether it's equipment and systems. And this idea that Airport CDM brings improvements to operational inefficiency means that we can operate our airport more efficiently, which means we get the maximum possible use out of the capacity which we already have latent in our system, and also maximize the capacity as we move forward with our operations. Next slide, please. So now I'd like to just talk about what is Airport CDM in a little more detail. So we'll just jump to the next slide. One of the core concepts for Airport CDM is enhancing common situational awareness and operational predictability by sharing information, which will result in the optimization of airport and airspace capacity. You will hear this spoken about a lot. It's discussed in almost every Airport CDM document, that idea of bringing the right information to the right people at the right time in order to enable them to make the right decisions. Next slide, please. So Airport CDM is about setting up a standard operational planning process at a local airport and then improving the predictability of the flight events. And so we need to establish some clear structure around how we talk about flight events. And it is an enabler for improved stakeholder planning and efficiency. So by improving our predictability, we can enhance the efficiency of the airport operation. That is the core scope of Airport CDM. So what is Airport CDM in broader detail? If we just jump to the next slide, we can see that there are 6 key elements to Airport CDM. Information sharing is the way we take the information and what that information is and circulate it through the different stakeholders on the airport. Those key stakeholders, when we discuss this, are the air traffic controllers, the airport operator, the ground handlers, and the airlines that operate on the airport. And we share the information by using what we call the milestone approach. This is an agreed structure, which I'll discuss a little bit more in a moment, but it's an agreed model of saying what is that information we need to share and when should we share it. Then we bring in variable taxi time, which is the adaptation of the aircraft movement on the airfield, depending on which runway an aircraft lands on and which gate the aircraft parks at. Each of these elements comes together to give us a different time that the aircraft would take to make the transit. And we become that accurate with Airport CDM that we care about which location an aircraft is parking, because its arrival at the gate will be dependent on that variable taxi time. Then we move into collaborative pre-departure sequencing. This is taking the information on when an aircraft will be able to leave a gate and sharing that with air traffic controllers to find out when the aircraft will be given startup approval. So this is enabling the ground handlers and the airlines to start to plan and feed information to air traffic control and receive information back from air traffic control on the departure process. And this is a very key element of the Airport CDM model. Of course, Airport CDM doesn't just operate in normal conditions when the weather is fine and everything is running on track. We all work in aviation. We know that that's almost never the case. So we need to build an Airport CDM system which is robust and able to operate in adverse conditions as well. And then finally, the key step forward into the future and moving from Airport CDM to beyond is to take the information that we have from the Airport CDM system at a particular airport and share that with the greater aviation network to enable the air traffic control organizations and the network planning to become more efficient. Because the time an aircraft departs from one airport in Bolivia may affect the arrival demand at another airport, say in Brazil. So we need to be able to take that information and share that across our network. That collaborative management of flight updates is very important. We jump to the next slide. I'll show you the milestone approach. Is a way of following an aircraft's movement from when it first flight plans its inbound trajectory into the Airport CDM terminal or airport. Then through the inbound phase of flight, we have a number of milestones that tell us when the aircraft will be passing through different checkpoints, and we use these as an architecture for sharing the flight information. So this milestone approach is a key fundamental principle for information sharing in Airport CDM. If we jump to the next slide, please. I'll just speak through this very briefly. In fact, we'll skip forward to the next one, the benefits of airport CDM implementation. If we can have more accurate arrival times for inbound flights, we can be more proactive about making decisions on how we manage that aircraft into the airfield, and also understanding what time the aircraft will arrive at a gate means we can plan from a ground handler's perspective and from an airport perspective to make sure that we don't have gate conflicts and that we have resources available to service that aircraft as it arrives. We also use that information to improve the planning for the turnaround process. And if we jump to the next slide, we'll talk about the outbound piece. By using our predictability of understanding when an aircraft will arrive, how long it will take to turn around, we can then predict what time the aircraft is most likely to leave the departure. We can develop from that enhanced punctuality using the predictability for it. And with all of this information, we are improving situational awareness through all of the stakeholders that operate on the airfield. Next slide, please. Now, when we start to have the ability to predict, we can use that predictability to start to steer our performance. If we focus on predictability, then we start to focus also on compliance to make sure that our predictability is becoming more accurate. So part of the program for this work will be preparing organizations to steer and to stimulate the engagement to move the flights forward. And we need every organization to work to enforce the rule set of airport CDM, to encourage operators to do the best. And because the way we set that up is by moving air traffic control and airport operations away from the old standard idea of first come, first served. We move to best planned, best served, which is a way of rewarding operators for providing information and being punctual and being accurate. And we can set up processes in the business rules which encourage good behavior and encourage people to share information and share their decision-making moving forward. This is part of the work that is required to be set up, and the planning for this starts early in the airport CDM process. Next slide, please. So breaking down flights into aircraft operations into flight events gives us the ability to accurately predict and share information. And by doing that, we can get plenty of benefits, but it takes time to develop those benefits and to embed the operation. Airport CDM is a starting point for total airport management and the airport operations plan. And it's a culture change with impact on all of those involved. It's not going out and procuring a tool. That's one of the things you do in the process, but it's certainly not the first thing that we would recommend in setting up airport CDM. The most important part is to have a plan. If we could jump to the next slide, please. So who leads airport CDM? We'll go to the next one. Thank you. So an airport can lead airport CDM, and this is the original model for airport CDM, a single application across a single or perhaps a couple of airports. It depends on who has the motivation. If the airport has a capacity issue and is motivated to move forward with airport CDM, the airport is also the place where the ground operations and most of the functions happen in airport CDM. An airport is where predictions are needed in order to manage it, and the majority data owner on an airport is the airport operator. So in a lot of ways, it makes sense that the airport operator runs it. And in fact, the airport operations database is a key location for housing an airport CDM system. And that airport CDM platform is called an ACI-LAC. It can be housed in or as part of an AODB. Excuse me. Next slide, please. But it doesn't just have to be a single airport. We can have a single application operated, for example, by an ANSP, which delivers the same service, but across multiple airports. So if you have an aviation structure which enables that, you could have an ANSP delivering an airport CDM system. And in fact, this model or similar models are being deployed in a number of locations around the world. It applies an equity principle for all flights. So the airport CDM system operated by an ANSP, and because it's owned by an ANSP, can generate a lot of the data coming from the ANSP side. It also is useful from an ANSP perspective because they're looking to manage their traffic demand and their traffic flow operation as well. So it's just a different perspective of it. And while airports are the majority data owner on the airport side itself, in terms of the arrival time and the departure time from the gate, air traffic controller is an integral element of that and therefore has a lot of the data themselves. So they could also become a proponent of an airport CDM system, using their surveillance data and their ATM information to process through. So it's not just an airport that has to lead, it could also be done by an ANSP. If we could just jump to the next slide. Eurocontrol has a structured working group, the EuroCai working group, and they work specifically to develop up the system specifications and designs for airport CDM. So there is a lot of technology guidance in terms of airport CDM. And the technology, as I said, is very important. But if we jump to the next slide, please. It's important also to have a consultancy plan for airport CDM. This consultant can be anyone. It can be someone that is a project leader working on behalf of the airport or of the ANSP or whoever is the proponent for airport CDM. And that role is to facilitate the implementation of airport CDM across the project and to lead a core project team made up of multiple stakeholders. And this is the piece that's often missed, is that we need to have engagement and buy-in at the very initial stages of airport CDM from airlines, ground handlers, the ANSP and the airport to all move together with an agreement to use operational data to steer and also to steer work towards performance reporting and performance management. Anticipating disruption in operations, reporting to the program manager, and moderating operational expert workshops where the project team for airport CDM starts to understand what are the use cases and what are the key elements of the concept of operations that need to be established in order to build a project. Next slide, please. And I might just skip through this if I can. I realize I'm running quite tight on time here. Could we just skip through a few more slides to the next contents lead, which is the conclusions recommendations slide. And then I want to get into the workshop. So airport CDM, as I've said, is a culture change, and it requires a lot of teamwork. It needs to have an organization put in place across multiple stakeholders that agrees on how to steer the work, how to monitor the performance of it, and how to manage the airport CDM system as it's developed and then as it's implemented. So putting in structures in place that ensure that we have procedure adherence is vital to get to predictability. And we want to promote transparency and an open mindset and an open debate across each of the stakeholders who, in the initial stages of setting up an airport CDM project, are generally quite reserved, if you like, and are concerned that they are releasing their IP, their information property or intellectual property to other companies and their competitive edge. So we need to move beyond that. And part of the work in setting up the airport CDM is to put in place that culture change of teamwork to engage all of the stakeholders. For example, the airlines, to say it's okay to share your operating times into the system. This isn't something that you need to keep secret anymore. Let's be quite frank about it. It's all available on Flight Radar 24 anyway. But this is putting it in a place where we can make positive decisions to work together. If I could just skip through a couple of other slides to the first workshop conduct research point. So if you were looking to set up an airport CDM system, the first thing we would like to look at here is start to read some documents. There is a copy of the Eurocontrol Airport CDM Implementation Manual, and I would recommend that you read it from cover to cover. There is a great deal of information in there, and it sets the context and the need and a lot of the first steps that are required. There are other documents that have that as well too. We need to read the ACI manual, which Thomas showed you at the start of this presentation. That is a fabulous document developed by your organization, and it talks about the concept moving all the way through. CANSO provides a number of other guidance documents. There is guidance material in CANSO on the airport CDM key performance measure structure. There is a guide to how to implement airport CDM and air traffic flow management together. And there is another guide by CANSO, which is the airport CDM optimization document. These are very, very useful reading material. They're hyperlinked in the presentation, so you should be able to jump directly to those documents. If we just jump to the next slide, it's important then to understand the motivation of your stakeholders and consider the best model for your situation. Do you have a single ANSP looking after a number of airports in an area which would benefit from a simple implementation of a single airport CDM model that can deliver the service to multiple airports? Or do you have one major airport that requires the operation and therefore would be best led by an airport? So discussing which is the best model to move forward with. And then before committing to airport CDM and jumping in to do it, while we recognize that ICAO encourages this to be implemented and the Global Air Navigation Plan says when you should do things, it's also impossible to get, it's also required to get motivation by conducting a gap analysis. Let's find out what the airport operations are now, what systems are in place, what systems are required, what procedures are in place, what procedures are required. And then from that, when we understand what the baseline is and what we would need to do to implement airport CDM, then we would develop a cost-benefit analysis. That cost-benefit analysis will tell us how much it's going to cost to bring this system in approximately, but critically, what's the benefit that will be achieved by each of the different stakeholder groups? What's the benefit to an airline in doing it? What's the benefit to the ground handlers in participating? And from that, we can not only make a business case for the entire implementation, but you then have the business case and motivation for the individual stakeholders to become involved. Why are we doing airport CDM? It's because there are clear benefits in here and we need to move forward. This is a must-do for us as an organization because we can save money and we can develop our capacity better. Next slide, please. So now that you have a plan and you've got a business case for airport CDM, then you need to have in place a governance model. It requires the stakeholders participating at an airport or at multiple airports to sign a memorandum of understanding across all the stakeholders. And these are the key stakeholders, not everybody, but the key operators on the airport and the key air traffic control delivery organization to come together and agree, we are going to do this and we are committing to work together for the common goal, for the common good. And our plan here is to share our information and our data within the scope of airport CDM to improve the operation for every operator on the airport. And the next slide, please. So once we have a plan and a business case, then we're developing up terms of reference documents. So these documents will set up what each of the team members or each of the organizations are required to give us that governance. We want a steering board put in place which oversees the implementation of airport CDM and tells us what we need to do and empowers each of the individual organizations. It's a little bit like setting up a new company. We then need to have a project implementation team. That's a team that's going to work across all of the stakeholders, led by perhaps the airport operator, or could be led by the ANSP. But that project team consists of members from each of the stakeholder organizations providing information, collaborating on the concept development, collaborating on use cases and scenarios, and then finally the procurement of a system and the testing of that system from live trials to full live operation of airport CDM. You then need to have a performance team that is tracking the performance of the airport CDM from baseline before you start through the trial stages to full operation to prove and demonstrate that you are achieving the goals that you expect. And then we have a change management team who is tracking the back to make sure that the changes we are making in each of the different operators around the airport are not creating risk in the operations of other operators. When we share information from an airline with a ground handler, with ATC, and we enable our systems to pass information backwards and forwards and make decisions, we need to make sure that the decisions we are making and the information we are sharing is not triggering some adverse effect that we weren't expecting. I do apologize for speaking so quickly and jumping quite a few slides there, but if we could just step forward to that final summary point. Planning, having buy-in and good education of both your management teams and your operations staff at all the stakeholder organizations will provide the best possible results. And I can't say this strongly enough, airport CDM is not a technology system. It's a cultural change that's enabled by technology. I think that's it. So I do apologize for rushing and taking so long, and I'm very happy to open it up to other questions.
Thank you, Matt and Thomas, for your presentation. Unfortunately, we ran out of time, but we invite the participants to send their questions that will be forwarded to our speaker, to Matt and Thomas. So you will have the answers from them. We strongly suggest to you to send your questions. This is a really important topic for the region, really interesting, the last slides about the workshop. I also want to remind you what Thomas briefly mentioned in his presentation, that the ACI document or handbook on A-CDM is also available in Spanish. So in case you wanted to have access to it, please go to the ACI.io website, to the part of publication. You can download it there. So remember, it's also available in Spanish. So as mentioned, unfortunately, we don't have time for questions. We really want to thank Thomas and Matt and Javier for your time and for taking the time to share your knowledge. And as mentioned, if in case you have any question for the panelists, please send it and we will forward it to them. Nothing from our side. Thank you very much, and see you in the next webinar. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.